Welcome to the deep dive. If you're anything like us, you probably remember the turn of the 21st century. There was this real buzz, wasn't there? A kind of optimism.
Yeah, definitely a feeling of progress, maybe more equality, justice, all that.
Exactly. But then, well, things didn't quite pan out that way, did they? Instead of that brighter future, we got hit, like one crisis after another.
For sure. International terrorism, big economic downturns, then a pandemic, these huge digital monopolies.
Right. Political polarization going nuts, energy and food shortages, millions of people becoming refugees. It just wasn't the future we were sold.
And it's really striking, actually, how all that chaos forced us to rethink something really fundamental, something deeply human, our vulnerability.
Ah, vulnerability. Okay.
So for this deep dive, we're going to unpack that idea. We're looking at some really insightful stuff from an introduction to a book. It's called Embodied Vulnerabilities in Literature and Film, edited by Cristina M. Gomez-Fernandez and Miriam Fernandez-Santiago.
Okay, so what's the mission here? What are we trying to figure out?
Well, we want to get past the simple idea of vulnerability, just meaning weakness. We want to explore its complexities, how it's always tied to our bodies inherently.
Got it. So let's jump in. It feels a bit weird, doesn't it? Like globalization was supposed to connect us, make us stronger, but the sources say it actually worsened these kinds of embodied vulnerabilities.
It does seem backwards, yeah. But that's the argument. It highlights this incredibly tight link between, our physical selves and how we relate to each other socially.
So how does that work?
Well, if you look at critical perspectives, Judith Butler, for example, she argues something pretty profound. She says that each of us is constituted politically, in part by virtue of the social vulnerability of our bodies.
Constituted politically, meaning our politics are shaped by our bodies being vulnerable.
In part, yeah. She goes further, saying the body implies mortality, vulnerability, agency, and it always has this invariably public dimension.
Yeah.
Your body isn't just yours privately. It's out there, interacting, being seen, being judged socially.
Okay, that makes sense. It's not just a private vessel.
Exactly. And then Tanya Tichkowski and Rod Michalko, they build on this. They say, our bodies are not as social since the social organizes even what can be understood as impairment, lack, defect, or bodily function.
Wow. So society doesn't just react to bodies, it actively defines what counts as impaired or normal.
Precisely. It shapes our very understanding of bodies, which leads to a really critical question Butler asks.
Which is?
How do we chase autonomy, independence, while also facing up to the fact that we are physically dependent on each other, that we're vulnerable to each other?
That's the core tension, isn't it?
It really is. And her answer emphasizes relationality. Our connections aren't just incidental. They're an ongoing normative dimension. Basically, our interdependence creates a kind of moral pull of forcing us to acknowledge it.
And that's the foundation for this ethics of vulnerability idea.
You got it. The idea that because we're all vulnerable in some way, that creates ethical duties for everyone, towards everyone.
So for you listening, what does this ethics of vulnerability actually ask you? How does it become more than just a concept?
Well, it pushes you away from seeing vulnerability as just a problem, something to fix or hide. Instead, it asks you to recognize that since we all share this condition, this bodily exposure, this reliance on others, we have a kind of collective responsibility.
Oh, responsibility.
To care for each other, not like charity, but recognizing this shared humanity, building systems that actually acknowledge and support our interdependence instead of, punishing people for needing help is a big shift in thinking.
It really is. And clearly it's an idea that's catching on. The sources show it's popped up everywhere in academia.
Oh, absolutely. Across the humanities, feminism, political philosophy, but also in STEM fields, biomedical sciences, civil engineering, sustainability studies. It's truly crossing disciplines.
Let's dig into the word itself, vulnerability. Does the word's history tell us anything?
It does, actually. It's fascinating. The etymology holds this built-in tension. You've got vulner, meaning wound or hurt, and then ability, suggesting capacity, resilience, agency. So the word itself contains this split, this debate. Is vulnerability bad, leading to exclusion? Or can it be good, maybe fostering connection?
So it's not just being wounded, but the ability or potential to be wounded and what that opens up.
Exactly right. Erin Gilson puts it really well. She says vulnerability isn't just limiting, it can enable us. It's a kind of openness.
Openness.
Yeah, openness to being affected by the world and also affecting it back. Margaret Shildrick calls it an inalienable condition of becoming. It's fundamental, and it opens us to harm, yes, but also to change, to transformation.
So faced with this openness, this potential hurt, how do people react?
Adriana Cavarero points to two basic opposing responses,
Mhm.
wounding and caring. You either hurt or you help, essentially.
And Simone Dritchell adds that if we see vulnerability only as a threat,
Then we try to build walls, right? Create impermeable boundaries. And sadly, sometimes that leads to violence, trying to shield oneself.
which brings us back to Butler's warning.
Exactly. Her warning that if one were successful at walling oneself off from injury, one would become inhuman. A really stark reminder that we need connection.
Okay, this is where Butler's distinction between precariousness and precarity becomes really important, right?
Crucial distinction. Yeah.
Yeah.
She defines precariousness as that shared universal thing. Our bodily exposure, our dependence, it's just part of being alive for everyone. We all get sick. We all need help sometimes.
That's precariousness. So what's precarity?
Precarity is when that basic precariousness gets ramped up, made worse by specific social and political conditions. Think lack of resources, limited ways to defend yourself, exposure to violence. It's context-specific, politically induced vulnerability, like precariousness being weaponized by unfair systems.
Right, and this connects to Guy Standing's term, the precariat.
Yes, exactly. Standing coined that term, blending precarity and proletariat. He identifies this global social class, even in wealthy countries, that lives in this heightened state of insecurity and vulnerability.
And it cuts across different groups.
Totally. Intersects with race, gender, disability.
Hmm.
And Standing describes this class as being at war with itself, often blaming each other for their situation rather than the system, like an autoimmune response.
An autoimmune response. Wow.
Yeah. And many in the precariat are what he calls denizens. They live somewhere but have limited rights. Think of skilled migrants who can't work in their profession, or women pushed out of careers by policies unfriendly to caregivers, or groups like the Roma who lack basic rights or benefits.
He calls it a lonely crowd.
Right. Isolated, often unaware they share this class identity with millions of others. And Standing's warning is that this could become the reality for most of the global workforce soon.
That's a heavy thought. And then there's the irony Ulrich Beck and Estelle Ferraris point out about our risk society.
Right. In a world obsessed with anticipating risk, where potential harms are constantly talked about, the very anticipation, the very visibility of risk becomes a new way people are made vulnerable.
It's complex. So if vulnerability is this widespread, how do we even start to map it out? The sources mention a framework by McKenzie, Rogers, and Dodds. They list 4 dimensions.
Yeah, they offer a helpful way to break it down. First, there's our embodied nature. Physical needs, getting sick, injured, disabled, dying, needing care. Just the facts of having a body.
Okay, embodiment. What's second?
Second is the social and affective dimension. Our emotional side. Exposure to loss, grief, neglect, abuse, rejection. That kind of psychological vulnerability.
Makes sense. Third?
Third, socio-political relations. This is about power structures.
Yeah.
Exploitation, oppression, having your rights violated.
Right. And the last one?
Finally, our relationship with the natural environment. Think climate change, pollution, the consequences of our actions on the planet, which make us vulnerable too.
And they also categorize these by source.
They do. There's inherent vulnerability, the stuff intrinsic to being human. Our bodies, our needs, our reliance on others, our social nature. It just is.
Okay, inherent. Then what?
Then situational vulnerability. This depends on context. It's caused or made worse by specific circumstances, personal, social, political, economic, environmental things.
So like poverty or living in a war zone.
Exactly. But then there's the trickiest one, pathogenic vulnerability.
Pathogenic. Like disease-causing.
Sort of. It's when attempts to help or reduce harm actually backfire and create new problems, new vulnerabilities. It's morally complex, like a policy meant to protect that ends up isolating people more.
That sounds like a nightmare scenario, which I guess leads us to Achille Mbembe's idea of necroeconomy, pushing vulnerability to the absolute limit.
That's where Mbembe comes in, yeah. He talks about an economy that literally profits from and manages death. He sees death as the ultimate vulnerability.
An economy of death.
He explores how huge groups of people are basically subjected to this living dead status. It blurs lines between resistance, suicide, sacrifice, freedom. The example he uses is the suicide bomber. The body itself becomes a weapon. It's a terrifying act of self-destruction. But he argues it's also trying to expose the deep unfairness, the perpetual uneven distribution of vulnerability in the world, showing how some lives are treated as completely disposable.
Okay, so stepping back, a lot of how society currently seems to deal with vulnerability relies on what the sources call a humanitarian quantitative economy of equality. That's a mouthful. What does it actually mean?
It is a mouthful. Think of it like trying to put a number on human value, a kind of mathematical morality.
Mathematical
Yeah.
morality.
Yeah, it's a system where we basically rank people or groups based on how close they are to some narrow, often biased standard of normal or productive. Complex lives get boiled down to stats, to perceived deficits, like your value depends on hitting these metrics.
So under that system, disability just becomes a disorder of perfect function.
Right. Or precarity is just an asymmetrical distribution problem.
Right.
Climate change is just disruption. Gender vulnerability is an imbalance. It's all very reductive,
Hmm.
oversimplified.
And the goal is always to get back to some fantasy state of invulnerability.
Exactly. This imagined utopia of invulnerability and sovereign integrity, which, the sources argue, never really existed anyway, except in our heads.
And chasing that impossible dream actually makes things worse.
Ironically, yes. It often leads to more vulnerability or this kind of unwarranted paternalism and coercion. Trying to fix what's just part of being human creates new issues.
Because it imposes these one-dimensional identities, ignoring the messiness of real life, how people actually feel about their quality of life.
You've got it. It might label a wealthy person with a disability as vulnerable, or a healthy woman experiencing precarity as vulnerable, just because they don't fit some arbitrary objective rate of equality.
And that sounds exactly like that pathogenic vulnerability we talked about earlier, the system itself causing harm.
Precisely. The attempt to equalize based on a flawed metric creates new ways people get marginalized.
Okay, so if that quantitative approach is flawed, what's the alternative? The book suggests this qualitative ecology of vulnerability. Sounds intriguing.
It really is a different way of looking at things. It embraces messiness, difference. Instead of reducing things to numbers, it tries to present reality vividly, dynamically, using hypotyposis instead of metonymy, as the source puts it.
Hypo what?
Hypotyposis is like painting a vivid picture with words, as opposed to metonymy, which is like using a part to represent the whole, often reductively.
Okay. So this ecology, how does it work?
It sees our bodies as porous, interconnected, not sealed-off units. We're constantly exchanging with the world, with others. Stacey Alimo calls this transcorporeality.
Transcorporeality.
Porous bodies.
Yeah, it allows for vulnerability to flow, for different capacities and vulnerabilities to exist side by side. It's not zero-sum. It values mutual differential value based on complementarity rather than loss. Think symbiosis, how different things can work together and benefit each other.
Symbiosis. Okay, so how does this apply to, you listening? Give me an example. Think about Brené Brown's work. A vulnerable child, or maybe an aging parent, needing care, makes the person giving the care feel valuable, needed.
Right.
And the person receiving care. Their value might be the love, the connection, the sense of purpose they give back. It's valuing difference because it allows for complementarity.
Yeah.
Not trying to make everyone the same to achieve equality. It's about finding worth in our interdependence.
That's a fundamental shift. So vulnerability isn't failure, it's
reframed as interdependent agency. It's not a flaw in the system. The person we might label vulnerable actually displays a kind of qualitative strength that's just as valid as a quantitative autonomy they might seem to lack.
so it prevents exclusion, fosters real connection.
That's the idea. Cohesion based on genuine complementarity, not just charity or pity.
Can you give some more concrete examples of this? Revaluing.
Sure. Think about the strength women often display in motherhood, or seeing the precariat not just as a problem, but as essential support for the whole global economy. Or recognizing someone with mental illness might still be physically very strong. Or that image from the source, a limping soldier and a blind child helping each other navigate. Each has a vulnerability, each has a capacity the other uses.
It leads to this powerful idea that nobody is invulnerable.
Nobody, even something as final as death, can acquire profound meaning. Think of martyrs, national heroes. It becomes a source of identity or transcendence.
But there have to be limits, right? This can't just justify any kind of vulnerability.
Absolutely crucial point. The sources are clear.
Yep.
Push this too far, and you risk extreme ideologies of oppression, trading vulnerability for dignity. So the limits have to be symbiotic equivalence and willing consent. Meaning the exchange has to be mutually beneficial and, crucially, freely chosen. This whole ecology refuses to justify or celebrate vulnerability that's imposed on people. It's about reconciling binaries. You can be vulnerable and autonomous, weak and strong. The key is consensual equivalence. Fair exchange, freely entered into.
Okay, so why look to literature and film to explore all this? What makes art so special here?
Well, art, especially stories in books and movies, has this amazing power. It can make abstract ideas feel real, visceral. It uses that hypotyposis, that vivid presentation, to challenge those simplistic, reductive views of vulnerability we talked about.
Makes things visible.
Exactly. It can connect the dots across time, making slow violence, like environmental damage happening over generations, feel urgent and visible now. And like Butler said, it can make those disposable lives matter enough to elicit the ethical response.
Make us care.
Yes. Jean-Michel Ganteau points out how art can generate ethical responses, specifically towards disabilities, for example.
But isn't there a danger? The source mentions overvisibility.
There is. That's the tightrope. Art can highlight vulnerability, but it could also just turn vulnerable people into, well, aesthetic commodities. Sensationalize suffering just for the story. It's a real risk.
So how does this book navigate that?
That's exactly what the book Embodied Vulnerabilities in Literature and Film tackles head-on. It digs into our assumptions about the vulnerable body. It asks how artists can create ethical conversations, give agency without exploiting people.
And expose stereotypes.
Right. Show how ideas about normalcy or autonomy often just push vulnerability onto the other, who then gets silenced or stigmatized.
And the book itself covers a lot of ground.
It's incredibly broad. Works from English, Spanish, Japanese, French cultures. Looks at novels, plays, poetry, film. And it connects vulnerability with embodiment and affect our feelings, using tools from eco-criticism, trauma studies, affect theory, lots of different lenses.
So let's hear about some specific examples they discuss. What stands out?
Okay, well, there's Maria Grajian's work on Japan's Takarazuka Review. Female actors play male roles, and she shows how they actually revise traditional warrior codes Bushido by performing a kind of masculinity of vulnerability. Really flips the script on strength.
Interesting. What else?
Marta Mikel Baldalou looks at films like Sunset Boulevard and Fedora, analyzing how aging actresses performing vulnerability challenges society's rigid ideas about women and aging.
Right, challenging norms.
Then Miriam Boren-Puyol looks at Ashley Smith's memoir Unlikely Angel and the film Captive. It shows how motherhood, even in extreme vulnerability, can actually boost resistance and resilience, finding strength through parental responsibility.
Powerful. What about childhood?
Andres Buesa focuses on Lakota children in the film Songs My Brothers Taught Me. He explores how art can prompt empathy without simply victimizing childhood vulnerability.
And theater.
Susanna Nicholas Roman examines Welsh plays, showing how live performance can reveal those intersecting vulnerabilities related to gender and class, what we call intersectionality.
Poetry, too.
Yep. Nicholas Hawke discusses a poetics of vulnerability in French poetry, challenging ableist assumptions about bodies and mortality.
It sounds like affect theory comes up a lot, too.
Yeah, it does. Paula Barbaguero looks at the novel Transcendent Kingdom. She explores how experiences of race and mental illness expose historical oppression embedded in how society dictates we should feel.
In technology's role.
Anna Chapman analyzes the TV series Maniac. It questions those transhumanist dreams of perfectibility, showing characters with mental disabilities seeking real human connection over some tech-based illusion of autonomy.
What about physical illness?
Leona Maria Martinez Serrano reads Madeleine Basnet's poetry about breast cancer. The experience of pain, she argues, actually enhances the perception of fragility, both of the body and of life itself.
And vulnerability isn't just urban, right?
Not at all. McHugh Devitt looks at Spanish literature about España vaciada, emptied Spain, denouncing how rural areas have been historically constructed and trying to shift that urban-rural power dynamic.
Displacement and identity seem like key themes, too.
Definitely. Luisa Maria Gonzalez Rodriguez discusses the film The Visitor. It focuses on the deep existential vulnerability of displaced people living under conditional hospitality and how connecting with others, even in precarious situations, can actually strengthen their sense of self.
Wow, so many angles. What about refugees telling their own stories?
That's the final chapter by Beatriz Perez Zapata and Victor Navarro Remesel. It was fascinating. They look at smartphone auto documentaries made by refugees. This kind of vulnerable filmmaking, they argue, lets people articulate their own experience as resistance. It makes it embodied, real, situated for the audience, gives voice and agency.
So pulling it all together, what's the big takeaway from looking at art this way?
It really highlights how literature and film can powerfully disrupt those simplistic, often harmful ways we talk about vulnerability. They open up spaces for us, for you, the listener, to reflect, to discuss, maybe respond differently, to deepen our awareness of our own vulnerabilities and those of others, to really think.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. We've seen vulnerability isn't just weakness, it's complex, it's part of being human, tied into everything, society, politics, the environment.
Yeah, from the precariat to the extreme of necroeconomy, and landing on this really hopeful idea of a qualitative ecology of vulnerability. It's been quite a journey through its meanings.
It really has. So here's a final thought for you to take away. If our society often runs on that mathematical morality, that quantitative system that ranks and devalues people labeled vulnerable, how can you start spotting and questioning those assumptions in your own thoughts, in your interactions?
What would it actually look like in your life to prioritize that meaningful quality, that consensual equivalence over just meaningless quantity in how we relate to each other and even to ourselves?
Something to think about.